I love maps in video games. Like, maybe to an obsessive degree. Whenever a game gives me a map, I'll spend minutes looking at it, scouring over each and every detail there is to see. This usually happens multiple times a playthrough. I've sometimes even booted up games I haven't played in years just so I can get a reminder on what the maps of that game looked like. I really have trouble explaining this fixation. What is it about these maps? Well, to get to any answer at all, I first want to spend the next few minutes or so gushing about some of my favorite maps in video games, and explain what's so interesting about each of them. I just finished talking about Wizard 101 on the channel, so that seems like a straightforward place to start. Good thing too, because it has some pretty good maps. In Wizard 101, maps come in two varieties, area and world maps, but both are plenty fun for their own reasons. The most immediately striking element of these maps are their distinctive art style. The layout of the area is traced over in soft, cartoony lines, with little drawings scribbled and squished in between the various pieces of geography. Indeed, the game even calls these Doodle maps, a title which is hard to disagree with. These doodles often depict major characters, enemies, or plot points that will occur in the zone itself, offering a touch more personality to the events you're seeing play out. Or, a funny visual gag here and there. As that update note foreshadowed, Stone of Heaven's map might just be one of my favorites in the game. The vertical ring structure of the area is not altogether common for Wizard 101, leaving an unusually barren space in the top left section of the Doodle map. Fittingly, that barren space is taken up by a giant Tung Ok basking in gold, perfectly befitting a tyrant warlord who, when given the chance to build his own reality, creates larger-than-life gold statues of himself to be the foundation of a structure that also happens to be a gold bust of himself. If any character should get an unusually large doodle map of himself, Tung Ok is just the guy. The world maps are more standard fare, but I really enjoy the colors and vibrancy on these compared to the area ones. Chrysalis's world map, for example, does a good job at encapsulating the journey the longest world in the game will take you on, with the starting area Bastion appearing at the bottom left, and the final area, the Shadow Palace, in the top right, across a multitude of fortresses, cities, oceans, and deserts. Imperia is another great example. The entire world deals with finding 3 paradox chains which bind the heart of the spiral, and the world map gives us a representation of how the paradox chains are organized relative to one another, something that's pretty difficult to parse from looking at the world zones individually. But most impressive about these world maps is their granularity. Take a close look at any of the individual areas, you'll see they retain their exact layouts and set pieces as the individual maps. This is most obvious with Caramel and Lemuria's maps, where even the little paths and trails in each zone can be clearly distinguished. Good stuff. As much as video game maps are nice for a good visual, functionality can make them as appealing as anything. You know what's almost as exciting as playing through a Zelda dungeon? Well, getting the dungeon map, of course. In some instances, the map is a primer for things to come, giving you an idea of the size and shape of the place you'll be spending the next half hour or so in. Other times, the dungeon map is given towards the back half as a reprieve, finally giving clarity on the place you've been mindlessly barreling through. In their best moments, dungeon maps are an asset in puzzle solving, letting you visualize how different pieces of the dungeon connect together, or how best to route your way through an area after a change is made. The DS Zeldas made a particular habit of this, as one of their main gimmicks was the ability to literally draw notes on the map itself. Looks can be deceiving. It might be intuitive to think that multi-floored monstrosities are going to be the most complex and difficult dungeons around, but it's often the single or two-floored dungeons with many connected rooms that prove the most challenging. Think Turtle Rock from Link's Awakening. Either way, a thorough examination of the map is an essential part of any Zelda dungeon, and if you're lucky, the dungeon might even be laid out in a fun shape, as the GBA Zeldas were especially wont to do. I always make it a point to open the map right before I exit a dungeon. Seeing all the once darkened rooms with locks, keys, and chests being emptied out into blank bright blue squares is extremely satisfying, like admiring your shining kitchen table after giving it a thorough cleaning. It's like saying, "Look what I did." Zelda dungeons almost sound like a prototype for the kinds of maps you might find in the Metroidvania genre, where maps are often an essential piece to navigation not just in specific zones, but the entire game world. Hollow Knight's and Ori and the Will of the Wisps maps act in a similarly cathartic manner as Zelda, forcing you to find the map giver somewhere in the area like you would a dungeon map inside a treasure chest. Whereas Zelda games offer a full view of the place you're exploring, Metroidvanias offer significantly less transparency. Part of the fun of this genre is being continuously surprised by new entrances and exits, slowly expanding the outer edges of the map to an extent you never would have considered. Watching the map of Hollow Knight extend downward an additional layer for a singular hidden area makes the abyss feel as forbidden and secretive as it should. The end result of all this exploration is a satisfying complex of tunnels and corridors, a gratifying reminder of all the territory you've made ground on over the course of the game. Other games like to emphasize maps as a kind of progress indicator. Nine Souls, a more linear Metroidvania, doesn't utilize the same techniques as some of its contemporaries. In Nine Souls, you'll end up exploring most of the area on your own without the need of a fully traced out map. Data chips can be found in each zone type and given to Shania 9000, revealing how many more collectibles and points of interest are located in an area. In that sense, Nine Souls leaves the job of map maker to you, with the chips acting as easy cleanup for anything missed on your expedition. This is very similar to how a series like Ys handles its maps, with a very strong focus on exploration and map making. In recent Ys titles, percentages are meticulously updated based on how many collectibles you've obtained, and how much of the game's world you've charted. Watching these numbers go up is an embarrassingly strong motivator to fill out the global map. There's nothing more dissatisfying than seeing a 98% completion on a zone, only because you've forgotten to check one tiny alcove in a fuzzy-looking corner of the map. On the flip side, there's little else as satisfying as seeing the full extent of the game world laid out before you, all reading 100% in every category. In Ys, becoming the map maker is one of the core appeals of the series. Considering the kind of character Adol is, that only makes too much sense. So having gone through all of these examples, and please tell me some of your favorite video game maps, what might they explain to us about my appreciably large appetite for these glorified pause screens? I think there's two primary explanations. The first is largely instrumental. Maps are a great way to reward players and show progression. This could be through statistical information or by slowly filling in locales as you explore, allowing for reflection on the entire canvas of your adventure and how you got here. Usually, it's both. The second reason is more intrinsic, yet very much interrelated and arguably true of real-life maps. They give us a more cohesive representation of these fantastical worlds that would be impossible to represent through the game otherwise. In Wizard 101, new zones are indicated simply by a banner appearing in a loading screen. Other than a few environmental cues, there's little to suggest what the next area will be like, or how these areas all fit together. Short of being an open world where multiple areas can be seen relative to one another, this is how most games operate. But the map offers a way to complete the vision, a context to understand the game world we're playing in as more than a series of discrete instances cordoned off by loading screens. Similarly, with Zelda dungeons, which are usually contiguous, you almost always experience these places one room at a time due to their nature as typically enclosed spaces. The map is ultimately what allows us to see the dungeon as a whole structure, rather than a sequence of rooms and transitions. The map, then, is the subtle detail that binds the whole experience together. It is what makes the difference between a game having levels and a game having a world.